guys, sorry you have not seen me in a while. I have been on a little break during the summer. I have taken the summer off. But today we're back with new videos, which I'm excited about. And so the topic today is the United States should establish a federal data protection agency. Let's get into it. Before we go into con and pro and all the stuff about it, I'm going to give you a little background. In 1890, two United States lawyers, Sam D. Warren and Louis Brandeis, wrote The Right to Privacy, an article that argues the right to be left alone, using the phrase as a definition of privacy. And then in 1948, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is adopted, including the 12th fundamental right, the right to privacy. So that was a little bit, I could continue going on and on when, different stuff was come up with, because, it feels like everything's changing and adopting. But we might be here for hours if I continue to go through that list. So we're just going to move on to the definitions, which was the federal agency are special government organizations set up for specific purposes, such as the management of resources, financial oversight of industries, or national security issues. So let's start off with it limits, and this is the con, just to make you aware of that. This is that we should not establish it, which con has a little bit of a harder side to argue with, because, why don't people want their data protected? And that's what con will have to get into, which is what it causes that's a negative effect, which is what I'm going to get into right now. So let's start off with it limits innovation because complying is hard for small businesses. So according to Springer Link, regulation imposes compliance costs on firms stopping resources otherwise available for productive activities such as innovation or raising entry barriers, thus reducing competition and innovative for innovation, or incentivizes for innovation. So I think really this kind of shapes up to that innovation is going to be reduced by this because it is taking away resources from those small businesses, from entrepreneurs who are just getting started, which is something we like to, support and stuff, because I feel like that's really important, especially to our economy. So that's part of it. Another part is Springer Links did an interview, and the interviews found that discouragement of one of the founders went as far to say as he would not found his company again today, given the constraints created by the GDPR. Which is kind of big, because if it's that discouraging that one entrepreneur said that he would not have started his business today because of that, it's just kind of big. I mean, if that's someone's response to that, then that's a huge element of it, and you can't let that go ignored. So this is specifically important because, to just wrap it up, this is, these small businesses have to sacrifice stuff just to cope with the new cost. They have to raise their prices, etc., and they have to find a way to cope with the new cost. And I think that is a big part of just the small businesses, of the business side of adding that in. But let's get into the actual people side. Still a little bit business, but let's get into the more people side. Actually, and people may be surprised with this, but it would restrict information and learning because stuff that were free will not be then. So if businesses have to pay for data security program into action, their prices would go up to accommodate this new investment they have to make, which stuff that you might find free and that you wouldn't find, that's a huge, huge importance that it's free. You might find that that's actually, they have to raise their prices, which would, not be very good and wouldn't make people happy, which would take down the traffic of, not actual traffic, because this isn't the highway, but would take down the amount of people viewing that because they wouldn't want to pay money for it. So, here's an example. When newspapers were introduced, they were physical copies, and they cost money. I know, not everyone remembers that now with new digital newspapers. But when digital newspapers were introduced, people started using them because they did not cost money. They were free. If we enforce these regulations, they will have to start charging money, which means less people will read them. The same problem that happened with physical newspapers will happen with virtual newspapers. Will happen with, when you're reading stuff online. New York Times, Washington Post, all those stuff, they'll have to actually charge money or charge more money for stuff because they have to be able to pay those costs that come in line when you do add this. Also, so just to round this out, news and other informational sources will have to put or raise prices on that because because they need to make money so that they can pay for these costs, which will also make people stop reading them, and so they aren't making as much money because there's less traffic. And this one is probably the most out of the two others that I've done, or the three that I've made for Khan, that people will be like, really? You don't consider it that much because it's not something that applies to everyone, and it's a group that it applies to. But it's still pretty significant to that group. So it promotes economic inequality because businesses have to start charging money. So the reason why I would promote economic inequality is because sites that lower income people use have to start charging money, and those people who are lower income have limited resources, limited money that they're taking in. That's why they are lower income. So they're not going to pay for that because that's, a waste of their money. Even though information is important and stuff, and, being able to get stuff is important, but you can't pay for those smaller things if they start charging money for them because you have other stuff to spend your money on, and because you only have a limited source. And it increases the gap between upper and middle class and then lower class, and that's the inequality gap, that the economic inequality gap that we're dealing with in the U.S. But so just to clear that up, it's because the upper and middle class people can spend their money on that site, whereas the people who are lower income, they can, but they shouldn't they might not want to. I'm not going to speak for everyone, but they might not want to because they have other stuff to pay for potentially, like food and, other stuff like that. And then, so that was the con side. I don't know if you were convinced. If you were, I'm glad. But it's a little harder for the con side, partly because you're arguing against something that's inevitably good. So you have to find those very few flaws in this, which means that you have to go looking for that specific thing that's, even that you have to argue that point as hard as you can, or if you let that pass, you don't got much else, so you really have to keep that point alive, which is really hard, I guess, in some cases, especially when pro has the easier side, because in the end, what the con is arguing against is protecting people's data, and protecting people's data is good. You just have to find those few problems in it, which can get hard, which is why doing a lot of research can take a while, which is why you do a lot of research, because not every site is going to have the information you're looking for. Alright, let me move on to the pro. The pro is the side that I said had a little bit of an easier side. And so I'm going to start out with the definitions, which was HIPAA, which was HIPAA. The HIPAA privacy rule requires safeguards to protect the privacy of personal health information, including medical records, insurance information, and other private details. So that's kind of like this topic. It's like that agency, but just for healthcare information. And so this is important because later, as I go into it, I'll explain that will be relevant, considering that I'll say, we protect this kind of data and people have supported it. Why not protect all? Isn't that more beneficial? And because really what this comes down to, what this debate comes down to, whatever you like to call it, what it comes down to is a cost-benefit analysis, which is this is good, this is bad. So you have to convince, if you're debating, or you have to convince the other person that, you know what, these costs outweigh the benefits, or these benefits outweigh the costs. And so that's really something that when you decide, if you put it on the comments, which I would like you to do if you want to, it would be amazing for me to hear back what you guys have to say. But when you go into the comments, really consider each side and say, well, this side was very convincing because, XXX, or XYZ. And then, but this side was a little more convincing because, one side I felt is better and should be taken into more consideration. And so really that's something we should take into consideration as we're deciding which side was better. But I'm going to move on to the first point, which is that we need a better data protection system. And this is really a front and forward point. It's more easy to understand because this is the topic that, we don't actually have a data protection system. We have an agency that does that, but also does other things. So I think this is trying to argue that an agency that specifically does that. And the reason why this is originally up front is because this is what you're trying to argue, that you need a better data protection system to prevent against people stealing your data and selling it. So this is what the debate's about, pretty much. So it's pretty front forward, and you'll hear a little more about that. So I'm gonna dive into that a little bit. So according to Pew Research Center, a majority of Americans believe their online and offline activities are being tracked and monitored by companies and the government with some regularity. It is such a common condition of modern life that roughly 6 in 10 U.S. adults say they do not think it is possible to go through daily life without having data collected about them by companies or the government. Now, this is just, whatever you'd like to call it, is crazy, because people should not be feeling that people are stealing their data every day. Daily life. That should not be part of daily life, whatever you say. I mean, neither should staying in your house and quarantining or wearing a mask should be daily part of your life, but that makes a little more sense than being tracked or potentially being tracked, and 6 out of 10 U.S. adults say that. And they say that you can't go through a day. They don't think you can go through a day without being having data collected by companies or the government. Now, government, potentially what they're using it for is a little better, but still, I mean, come on, people. You should not be feeling that you can't go throughout a day without being tracked. That's a little crazy. And in 2017, there was a disastrous breach at Equifax Yahoo's administration that Yahoo's admissions that billions of emails accounts were compromised. Deeproot's analysts accidental leak of personal details of nearly 200 million U.S. voters, and Uber's attempt to conceal a breach that affected 57 million accounts. That's just crazy. Like, these are few examples of breaches that, like, just hang on. They should be a lot bigger than that. 57 million people's information was stolen, etc. This is crazy. You can't have problems like that. And I think the point of this debate is that this agency would help solve that. And then just to wrap it up, people do not want their information being stolen or sold. This is a way to help stop people from stealing or selling people's information, and I think that is important, and that's something that's why we're having this topic as a debate. Alright, so I'm going to move on to the next point. Enough talking about this. But my second point is that can ensure safety of people's personal information. And now this is something that should be right to all people, and we shouldn't even be talking about this. Because it should be ensured that the safety of all people's personal information is kept personal, not other people's. So, yeah, in recent years, major data breaches have occurred at banks, credit rating agencies, and tech firms. Just imagine yourself being in that situation, and your stuff, your personal information was stolen. Imagine how you would just feel in that situation, and put yourself in that person's shoes, and then realize why we need to have this agency. And then, so, Facebook exposed the personal information of nearly 50 million users because it reportedly ignored warnings from its own employees about dangerous loopholes in its security. Come on, Facebook. Gotta be better than that when you're a company with, millions of people on and using your site. You can't completely ignore warnings. Or, these are your employees. These are people who you hire to help you. You can't just ignore them. That's, that is completely their fault there. Other cases, it isn't fully their fault, but that is just completely their fault. You can't ignore warnings and say, it's not my fault. Just to wrap that up, because I know I've said a lot and been a little crazy about that, but DPA could drastically reduce the amount of personal info being stolen. And that's really self-explanatory, because that was what I was a little going off about, because that's just kind of crazy that many people's info could be stolen, and just, But, so my point 3 was that we already have agencies to protect other data, so why not all data? And this was what I was talking about earlier about HIPAA. That is an agency that does healthcare stuff, or, keeps healthcare data. But I think that really ties into this point, and I'll go through it in the beginning, actually, so let me just hop into that already. We already have agencies that protect from healthcare information, which is being protect healthcare information from being stolen. Sorry, HIPAA is not stealing information, but stolen, HIPAA, and money being stolen, which is consumer financial protection. So why not all that? If we have this, if we put these agencies in place that have, that protect against this stuff that we're talking about, why just not do it for all agencies instead of just, a few agencies for specific things? So yeah, let me move on to the next little part of that point, which was that if people agree that we should protect people's healthcare data, then why not protect all data? Data is information that people can use to their advantage. If people agree that some data should be protected, then why not all? In this case, protecting more data is better than less, because protecting more data is what we're trying to do. That's the entire point of all of this. That's the entire point of what we're talking about. You want to protect more data. And I think that's our goal, and that's what can sometimes be missed about it. Colin was saying you're making companies worse, but in the end, this is about people's personal data. And yes, that applies to, companies, and but it's people's personal data. And you gotta remember, if you're having this conversation with someone, remember, it's about, you don't want to have a straw man fallacy, which is when you get sucked into another world that's about another topic, and you're just concentrating on that topic. Like, you're concentrating on companies' information being stolen instead of people's personal information, which is, you want to make sure you don't go into that, which is important if you're having a conversation like this. But I would really like to give credit to Ananth, who is one of the people who helped work on this with me, which was really nice of him, and I helped him and he helped me, and we did pretty good with it. I hope you guys liked it, and I hope that you guys write in the comments whether which side you're convinced by and which side you think outweighs the harms. It's a cost-benefit analysis, remember. And so, yeah, see you guys next time.